Take a look at Italy, a country with a rich history now destroyed. There is no growth left. The country is falling apart in many respects, yet it should be flourishing. There have always been problems in Italy, just like any other country, but with the attachment to the euro, things have never been worse. Their bad debt continues to mount, and the pressure continues to build. This won't end well. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today we are going to have our focus on Italy. Too many people have not seen what was coming, and it's pretty obvious. I talked about it in my first book. I talked about it in my second book. I've done so many videos about this. Keep your eyes on Italy. This doesn't take a genius to figure out. They are a huge economy, but at the same time, they're carrying a massive debt load. I'm going to show you some articles and some charts today, and I want you to keep your eyes peeled for the data as it unfolds. So let's begin by taking a look at this. Out of the Telegraph, crisis brewing in Italy will lead to default, exit from the euro, or both. This is very huge because, first of all, it's not me saying it, it's the Telegraph. They are the ones who are going to mention this bold statement, which could possibly be true. Imagine if they actually were to default. What would the ECB do if Italy came out and said, look, we're gonna do this, it's just gonna happen, we can't pay the bills? What would the EU do? What would they be able to accomplish if they were able to claim bankruptcy, to say goodbye to all those who had lent the money? Well, it would be absolute havoc. I do believe that this should happen. They should actually do both: default on their debt, exit from the euro, deal with the consequences for a period of time, and then be able to rebuild and have superior growth for years and years to come. Last week's data showing a drop in Italian GDP in the fourth quarter of last year confirmed that many people had suspected Italy was in a recession. And of course they are. Or rather, in another recession, for this follows similar phases in 2008, 2011, and 2012. Where is this going to end? But it's not going to end. That's the obvious fact for anybody who has paid attention. When you have the ECB printing money like there's no tomorrow, they're bailing out all of these European companies, and many of which are in Italy. They're buying bonds. They are doing everything they can to support them, and yet nothing is working. The only group that was buying Italy's garbage debt was the ECB at one point. So then, if they're not going to buy it anymore, well, who is left? Then the Bank of Italy started manipulating behind the scenes. I showed you some of that data, and this only makes matters worse in the end. They can't be resolved by central bank intervention, whether that's coming from the ECB, whether that's coming from the Bank of Italy, or any others. Although we have got used to weak economic performance from Italy, you had that period of time where things were doing very, very well for decades. In 1987, its GDP even briefly overtook the UK's, subsequently dropped down the international league table, so that by the time the euro was formed in 99, it was already a weak performer, but the euro has made matters worse. Since its formation, Italy has only grown by 9%. How in the world are they ever going to grow out of this problem when they're being dragged down by the EU, by the single currency, and of course by an interest rate that doesn't match up with any one single of these countries that it's attached to? Think about that. They're kind of just using these rates, all of these different numbers that they must live by, which doesn't really apply to anyone in particular. They're just numbers that they set, and they have to abide by them, or else it's big trouble, apparently. Well, this isn't going to work, and of course, the best possible thing right now, is for them to do both. If they were to actually default on their debt, it would be very painful. If they said goodbye to all those who lent the money is not going to be good in the short term. And exiting the euro, again, short term, very bad. But in the longer term, and even I would say medium term, I think it is very beneficial. If they went back to the lira, it's not going to look good in the very short time when there's chaos and panic. But if you think about it, you have a weaker currency, your exports are going to be booming, absolutely booming, and they can fix the problems that they had. But if you have the overlords from up above, the technocratic elite, deciding what happens in the country, how are you ever going to fix the problems? You can't. Of course, you can't. Well, this is the whole different discussion about the EU, the euro, and all of that business. But let's keep our eyes focused on Italy right now. I got a couple of charts to show you just to give you an idea of the GDP. Officially a recession, but this, as I told you, isn't the first time, but it just shows you where this country is headed economically. There is no possible way, with all the manipulation of the GDP, that you can't have positive growth. I mean, come on. There is massive contagion in Europe specifically, but of course this applies everywhere around the world. And before I show you this here, this is one of the problems I find with individuals who, quite frankly, they don't care about what's happening outside of their own borders. And that is very foolish. Let's look at this. The contagion factor. Total of non-Italian banks' credit exposure to Italy as of June 2018. Take a look at France. 285 billion euro worth. Germany, about 60 billion euro. Spain, about 21 billion. So just looking at that, I'll break it down further in a minute, but each of these countries is in a way attached to Italy. You might not know that, you might not think that, but that is the case. And let's go a level further. On the hook, breakdown of non-Italian banks' credit exposure to Italy. Private sector is the white areas, and that pink area is the general government. So you'll see, for example, BNP, Deutsche Bank, Commerce Bank, Barclays, other names in here you may recognize. All of these big banks own the debt of Italy. Whether it's coming from the corporations, whether it's the government, doesn't matter. So if Italy starts to suffer, these other banks are going to suffer as well. And guess what? The US banks are also doing the same exact thing. All of these banks buy each other's debt. They buy the government debt. This is all intertwined. That's why when people say, I don't really care what happens in that country. I live, for example, in the United States. Why would I care about that country? I need to worry about my own. But if you're not knowledgeable about what's happening around the world, it's going to bite you. Take, for example, what happened in 2008. You saw the subprime crisis. That's really what the trigger event was, starting from, let's say, 2006 into 2007. The biggest problems appeared in 2008. But it started to leak all around the world. Dubai real estate crashed. Why in the world would Dubai's real estate crash halfway around the world, and the US was the cause? Well, of course, when you look into it further, you start to piece it all together. The same thing with Europe. Europe suffered big time in the financial crisis, but that didn't have anything to do with the subprime crisis of the United States. People don't get it through their heads, unfortunately, and as I said, they will be burned because of it. Just look at the amount of debt. You can see the countries like Greece here, which is almost 180% of the GDP. Italy in second place, if you want to think of it like that, at approximately 130%. Portugal's right behind. Then you have Belgium, Spain, and others. This shows us that statistically, there's no possible way these countries could ever get out of the debt load that they have today. And one of the important things is that they've got a lot of these non-performing loans. You could see in Italy, 11% of the total loans are non-performing. Greece has 45%, but it's not necessarily based on a particular number. It's not based on the total or percentages or anything like that. The fact that there is a relatively large sum means that there's potential for disaster, and that is never going to be taken care of by the central bank. They're not going to make sure it's all good. We already saw them take extraordinary measures and they had no impact. Think about that. The ECB printed trillions of dollars, bought the corporate bonds. They did everything. And still today, look at the situation in Italy. Look at what's happening. They're blaming it on Brexit. Nothing has happened with Brexit. Let's be very clear about that. They've been using this for years now. Brexit is the cause of everything. Nothing has happened. Literally nothing has happened with Brexit. And they keep pointing their finger at it. It's a joke. Well, that's all for this video. If you found it informative, please give me a thumbs up. When you give me a thumbs up, you're supporting this channel. So I do appreciate that very much. And last but not least, if you want the financial education you weren't taught in school, these 2 books have everything that you need. You can flip through them at Amazon. There's a link in the description below if you want the audiobook that's available at themoneygps.com. If you want to find out about the ECB and what they just hatched in 2019, their money printing scheme, brand new, check it out, and I'll see you there.